Greetings. Hello. How are you? I am Pastor Terrell McTyer. I serve as your minister of New Church Strategies for New Church Ministry, a general ministry of Disciples Church Extension Fund. And it's my pleasure to be here with you, my Florida disciples. I would like to say that this pales in comparison to being there with you in Daytona or Orlando or Miami or some amazing destination, especially because it's snowing here in Missouri. But I also have to think about how many more people are able to be reached, how many different ways this is able to reach so many of you that may not have been able to travel to Florida either. And I think that's one of the lessons of the pandemic. For a long time as churches, we have made what happened on the Sunday morning experience the most superlative way to worship. If you had the privilege of being able to get in a car, get transportation, have on some decent clothes, be able to walk into service and have the social inept to be able to do the things that are necessary to sing and praise and all those different things, then you were a good Christian. And there were those who have been sick and shut in or left in the dark or not able to do those things for a very long time. And if anything, the pandemic has been able to help us empathize with those individuals who need a little bit something different in order to connect with God. And so as we think about reimagining the church in a post-pandemic reality, it is important that we think about those different things, those different people, and even the people who we've been able to engage since we've been in the pandemic, and how we cannot leave them in the dust when we return to whatever that was that we held so dearly before. So that's what we're going to talk about here for a little while. It's my pleasure to serve in this capacity. New Church Ministry is here to teach, equip, assist, and multiply emerging and affiliating disciples, leaders, congregations. We have been starting churches and helping the denominations start churches, helping them to do that for several decades now. Many of you have been around since the time of the 2020 vision, where we as a denomination have celebrated beginning 1,000 new congregations, and yes, 1,000 different ways. And now more than ever, we celebrate the many, many ways in which we can be church. For a long time, it was like thought of that a new church, and the way in which we did church was too different. Like, how could that be church? How could you have an online church and that still be church? And now we all have experienced that you can have a virtual reality experience to connect with community, connect with God, connect with people, connect with this earth. And so that's what we want to think about today. Now, we know that the pandemic is not quite over. We know that that COVID-19 is surely not over. I don't think that the idea or the virus will ever go away. We may learn to manage it better, prayerfully, but it won't ever be over. And so as the pandemic takes different shifts and different forms, and we have to do things differently in response to what was here before, one of the main things I want us to consider about the pandemic is how was church before? Do we really think that that we were doing all the things we needed to be able to do as church before? And so some of that, yes, we were doing a great job, and then some of it, the pandemic actually gives us an opportunity to do some things different, better, more efficiently than we had before. I think when we first went into this reality, a lot of people were expecting giving to be very different, attendance to be very, very different, and whereas there were some shifts, there are a lot of churches, a lot of ministries that have experienced quite a bit of growth and quite a bit of increases in even the ways in which people thought might not be possible. See, here's the thing. God knew there would be a pandemic, and God has not changed, but people have. We are a different society as a result of this that's happened across the globe. And one of the main ways in which we are different is that we must be willing to communicate different. I want to read to you a story that you probably know so well, that's coming out of the second chapter of Acts, the second Acts there in the New Testament. It is the story of when the Holy Spirit comes at Pentecost. And it says, when the day of Pentecost came, they all together in one place suddenly heard a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest upon them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now, they were staying in Jerusalem, God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. And when they heard this sound, a crowd came toward in bewilderment because each one of them heard their own language being spoken. And so utterly amazed, they said, aren't all of who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hear them in our native language? And so they go into this list of all the different languages and hometowns from which they come. And then they end by saying, we hear them declaring the wonders of God in our tongues. Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, what does this mean? And I think that is the question that we have to ask ourselves today. Again, people coming together in wonderment as to what's going on here. And we have to ask ourselves, amazed and perplexed, what does this mean? What is this new mode of communication that is necessary in this new reality of society? What does it mean? What does God really want for us to be doing differently? What does God really want from us in the way in which we are society, in the way in which we are people? And so there's a lot of different areas in which we can analyze that. One, I want to start with the 6 areas of congregational vitality. And I'll say them fast and I'll say them slow, but they are leadership, participants, community, finances, facility, and then the holistic health of the leader. So let's start with leadership. What should we be doing differently as relates to the way in which we think about leadership? So before, it was primarily about that person that has a position, or that person that has the degree, or that person that has the most Bible knowledge, or however you want to measure that. And so that has often been the idea of leadership. But the reality is, everything I learned about leadership, I learned from first fellowship. So the most essential thing that we can do as leaders is be good followers. And that's exactly what we need to teach every single person a part of the collective. That is a shift from just focusing on leadership into focusing on discipleship, which means we have to, on fellowship, which means we have to prioritize discipleship. What is a disciple? A student, a follower, a disciplined follower of Christ. So whereas leadership is good, it's not always just about getting people to the next level of leadership, as much as it is to encourage them, empower them, and equip them to follow Christ the way that they can. And so when we are building up leaders to be able to do that, we want to think upon that vein. And one of the beauties of this scripture from the Acts 2, a lot of times people focus on the miracle of that as being the way in which the tongues fell and the fire and the wind and all of these. But I say this is the miracle of communication, that because of this miracle, people were able to have the gospel, receive the gospel in their language like they had never before. And so what languages are being spoken today differently than what had been before? And who can now hear God and hear the gospel as a result of this new way in which we speak? And is your church speaking a new language? Are we reaching new people groups that are out there? Are you reaching gamers? Are you reaching the alpha generation? Are you reaching people who are of great privilege? We focus a lot on the poor, but how do we focus and cater, have a good ministry that focuses on the soul of the privilege? If you're able to speak that language, are we able to speak languages of ethnic and cultural diversities? Are we able to do the things that we need to do that help us get the gospel into new people groups and into new ears. And so that is what we need to do, is not necessarily start communication classes that focus on different ways to speak. This is not a commercial to sign up for Babbel or some type of app to learn a new language. This is about finding the leaders who already speak the language. So they're in your community, they're in your families, they're in your households, they're in your backyards. Find those people and get them and empower them, encourage them, equip them to do the right type of leadership. So now we're looking at leaders not just based off the fact of how much they've been educated or what their skills or experiences are, but the ability to communicate new languages in ways that we hadn't before. So that person who does understand technology, for whom it's not a huge obstacle, if that is a language, that's a gift that needs to be elevated. And we need to think about how to push those leaders forward. Okay, so that's the first level of leadership of congregational vitality that we need to think differently about. The second one is what I said, participants. Now, back in the day, I meant like 3 years ago, but back in the day, we used to call these members. And if there's anything challenged more than there ever has been, is the construct of membership. Matter of fact, I bet if you look at your current bylaws, you will see a definition for membership that probably does not fit the reality of your congregation today. Whether that means attending a certain amount of times or participating in a certain way, you probably have had your membership revoked by sheer default of what you needed to do in order to stay well and stay alive in the pandemic. So let's not just push back to that reality. Let's take a moment to examine and take a shift from membership into participants. Okay, so how are we going to get people to participate, not just be a member? Because there's something hierarchical, there's something antiquated about this construct of membership that, and there can be levels of and degrees of partnership and engagement that you title in whichever way you choose. But understand that there are different ways of participating. So now, those times when you had those Zoom meetings and your auntie from Alaska was able to participate and was now doing things that weren't able to be done before because she wasn't going to come all the way to Florida from Alaska to participate in your wonderful service. Now we're giving her an opportunity to participate, and we have to keep that going. Don't lose those people. And let me tell you, friends, it's not necessarily mean that you need to set up a camera in the back of your sanctuary to start having zooming into it and thinking that is what hybrid ministry is. That's not necessarily exactly what you have to do all the time. Think about it in this way. What is the essential thing that needs to be delivered or served? And what are the ways in which they need that communicated? So the auntie in Alaska has something specific that she is needing from your church, wants from your church. It maybe is not going to be community or relationship in the way that you were used to when you're able to just eat donut and coffee at Sunday school. Now it needs to be a little something different. But she has other people in Alaska. She has other people in Anchorage that are wanting to have the same type of relationship. And so how do we empower her to be able to do that? And now you have this participation that is boundaryless. It crosses across the globe just because you have decided you will communicate in a different way. We all know people in our neighborhoods who would say, if you ask them, to what church do you belong? They would say, oh, that church. And they probably have never even been in your church. And so there have always been people who participated who weren't necessarily qualified as members. And so we need to examine this idea of membership. And if that's an old thing that's holding us back and keeping us in a certain mentality and mindset that's not helpful and probably maybe even not spiritual, or can we shift into a way that examines the multitude of ways for people to participate in the ministry. And so that gift of the pandemic says, how do we participate if they're not coming to the building? If we don't have a building, how can we still allow for engagement? How do we still have participation? So that is something that you definitely want to consider when you think about your participants. Another thing with participants is the way in which they fellowship. And so you do need to consider ways to allow people to have that human interaction. Now, I know that most of us would feel like the best way to interact with another human is the ability to be in the same room with them or to touch them or be in their presence. And whereas presence has a great deal of value, one thing we can learn from Generation Z is that you can have very valuable, strong, real relationships with someone you've never been in the room. They do it during gaming, they do it during dating, they do it during the ways in which they are engaging education. Now today, there are offices across all levels of businesses that are completely virtual, and they have been for a long while. Still quality, still providing exactly what is necessary for the customer, for that bottom line, but not necessarily needing to be in the office with each other for whatever purpose that could serve. So it doesn't mean that you have to shut down the elements of your ministry that are in person. What I'm saying is consider other pathways of participation. All right, so that's leadership, participation. The third is community. I kind of mix some of the community in with what I was saying about participants, but just think about participants are the internal elements, community is the external elements. So when we think about community, how is your collective going to relate with people who are not participants per se of your congregation, who would not consider themselves a part to the degree of any level of membership? So a lot of times we think about this as moving from being attractional to being missional. So the issue that we had during the pandemic as we were transitioning is that we would try to take the services that we would provide, the worship service experience that we'd provide, and we would try to make that into what we need to do for on video. So now we're trying to produce videos or produce this Sunday morning expression, and it wasn't always that great. Not to mention the internet is very, very, very crowded. So if someone just wanted to hear the best singers, the best preachers, see the most pretty people, the most, they could find anywhere on YouTube or Instagram, these people, these videos. So what makes yours stand apart? And that is the way in which you move from thinking about just being attractional, trying to get people to come to you, to being missional, which is pushing the people out, being the hands and feet of God, going out into the neighborhoods, the communities, to all areas, and being able to do this. So now we have opportunities to go out into the community in ways that we did not consider before. So talk to your community, ask them, what do you need? How can we help you? How can our church participate? What do you have going on that we can get with you? Because we have a common goal. We care about together the commonwealth of people. We care about together the commonwealth of these neighborhoods in this community. And so how can we work together in order to do that? What I'm saying is essential in the fact that I'm saying ask someone. A lot of times we get into our rooms, into our fellowship halls, and we have all these great ideas. And more than likely, your idea is not off or not bad, but it's really hard to do something for someone without them. So rather than just creating this big program, this big event, and wondering why did no one participate, you thought it was such a great idea, it's always good to ask first about other people about what their need is, what they would like, what would entertain them, what would actually meet their core desires. And so ask those questions and get out to the community and begin to do more listening than speaking, than providing, than delivering. Just really, really listen to people and do so in a way that doesn't say that you have the answer. We do know Jesus is the answer. And ultimately, that's the destination that we would like to see all of them go to. But first, sometimes it is about introducing them to Jesus before just expecting them to follow Jesus or to fall in love with Jesus. So first, let's be that person that helps introduce them to Jesus. So get them out. Now, I've said through this a couple of things. I've said a us and a them that doesn't really feel good to me. I'm saying that there are participants, and then there's the community, and there's the ways in which to be externally focused. There's ways to which to be missional. But here's the reality. The more that you merge these two concepts of everybody's a participant in the way they engage your collective, and there's no divide between who we are and the community, then those two will be less distinct and begin to blur, and all of the community will be the participants. And what a beautiful goal that will be. Also, think about the expansion of your backyard, the expansion of your porch. What does community even mean? Is that only local? Is that only geographical? Or does community mean the people who also love to ride bikes through the mountain? Does that mean people who also love to do yoga on the beach? Is community also about single fathers who are really thriving to make sure their sons have what it needs to be good human beings in society? So really kind of think about what are some of the communities that we have not considered, and start with communities that your current participants are already a part of. That way it can be authentic, it can be meaningful. It actually can a lot of times be easier than trying to go out and get something. For instance, many of us feel as though our congregations are not thriving right now because we don't have young people or families. Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true, unless you're comparing who you are today to who you once were when you were the one that was young, and when you were the one that had the family. Well, things have shifted. But that doesn't mean that people who are like you don't still need Jesus. So find other people who are like you and invite them to church, who are not looking for vitality to come from something young. And so I don't think that's a helpful mindset that we need this missing group in order for us to be who we're supposed to be. We're no longer who we're going to be. 2019 is gone. It won't ever come back. This is the way in which we are now. So how can we reimagine the things we do as a result of this pandemic and a result of the things that have changed in society, or the things that have changed right in your collective? And that's what you must continue to ask yourself. What does this mean? So there's leadership, there's participants, community, then there is finances. When you're thinking about being vital, when you're thinking about being missional, when you're thinking about finances and your budget, you have to really ask yourself, on what are you spending money? Are you spending money mostly, like most churches, on salary and facility? Well, I would examine those two elements. First of all, with facility, do we need the facility that we once needed? Do we have the same type of ministries? Do we have the same people coming to the building? Are we using it in the same way we once did? Is this the right time to consider a way to reimagine the facility we already own or have, or go into a place that's more befitting of who you have become and the vision you have set before you? Take that time to really have that hard question. I know it's a hard discussion to have, because you do get attached to that building. There are memories there. There are that really anchor you to that facility. But it's time for a shift. And so we have people who can converse with you about that at Disciples Church Extension Fund. If you go to disciplescef.org, there's someone there who can help you think through, what do we do with these facilities and how do we live into a different future as a result of them, with or without a building? So if anything else, for 2 years, we experienced what ministry could be like without a building. Maybe we did that kicking and screaming, and that was dreadful, and could not wait to get back into our facility. But I don't want us to take away the gift of what happened during that time. The other element, other than just the facility taking care of it, is also the way in which we spend a lot of our finances on staffing, on the people that we pay. Now, trust me, I'm not against people being paid to do what they have poured education money into, their life, their passion into, the same way we should pay our butcher and our beautician and our banker. We should also consider paying our clergy and our people who are in ministry, especially if they are, if that is their full-time calling to what they are trying to do. But if we have to really do an examination on the expectation of what we are pulling into that facility, those people who are staff, and how many hours or how much compensation really matches the expectation of what we would have there for them. So when we do that type of analysis, then we maybe think about, before we expected the pastor to do this, but now that expectation has changed, and these are the things that we need for that person to do. And so before, we needed a pastor for 40 hours because they were managing facility and managing this and doing that and the other. And now we don't need someone for that many hours a week. So we need to scale back to 20 or 30. Or maybe because we had a great band and a great choir, and right now we're not able to do choirs, or we may not do choirs for a long time, then we don't need the same level of band that we used to. So we could pull away from that, and you don't have children in your church. There's all sorts of things that you can look at, but analyze your your finances, and see where there are opportunities to shift from spending money in the ways that you had before into something different. What I would love to see is that you start thinking about your legacy in your finances, which means that you're able to put energy into multiplying, able to put energy and monies into actually pushing things forward that that will have its footprint, fingerprint of your ministry on it, but not necessarily exactly what your ministry does. Like, for instance, starting a new church. Now, you may say, we're having a hard enough time struggling with the church we have. How in the world can we start a new church? But there are lots of ways to actually partner with your region, partner with the general church, partner with New Church Ministry to figure out how it is that you could start a new church. And sometimes that means sponsoring some some church planting pioneer to have a coach, or their registration to Leadership Academy we host every fall. There's all sorts of ways to support. And there's other missions you have right in your neighborhood, right close to you, that you want to consider. So sometimes you have to do that. And I remember when I started my last church, our goal was to flip that idea of that 90% went to staff and facility, and only 10% went to mission. We wanted to flip that and be able to live off that 10% as far as what we are, and send 90% of that out the door externally. So that means we had to take in quite a bit in order to do that, or we had to have a very lean ministry. And I think that there's room for both of those realities. So the fifth one was facility, and I kind of really spoke a lot about facility when I hit on finances. So I'm going to move forward from that. The sixth area of congregational vitality that I want to bring up is on the holistic health of your leaders. The pandemic was quite taxing psychologically for so many reasons. And so before, there were already climbing numbers in suicide and depression and divorce and things like that amongst clergy person. Well, it hasn't slowed down. In some ways, it's gotten worse, because not only are we as clergy having to deal with the things that we have to deal with, avoiding getting sick and taking care of our own families and ourselves, but we also take on the welfare of our sheep, of the people of which we have oversight. That's a lot. And so when I talk about holistic health, I mean really putting in the work to consider the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health of your leader. It's really super important to do what you need to do those things that will undergird them, build them up, give them the type of health that is necessary to continue this journey. None of us know what to do. As much as I'm saying all of this in this workshop, you know, all of this to some degree is a bit etherical. So yes, some of these things have been tested, and now we're almost 3 years into the pandemic here in about a month, but we're still trying to figure it all out. Things keep changing every single day, it seems. So as that change is going to be constant, we need to also add another constant, which is the constant care of the people who are given the commission to take care of our congregations. That is super, super, super important. So just remember these areas of congregational vitality. Have a conversation with your congregants. Have a conversation with the people that you feel closest to, and say, how are we going to do leadership different? How we will do membership and participation different? How will we do, how we engage the community differently than we had before? How will we think differently about our finances and the use of our facilities? And by all means, how will we care for each other in holistic ways? One of the things that I would often say when people first started reaching out during the pandemic and saying, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? Is I would give them kind of a shocking response that really was quite revelatory. And I would say, well, it sounds like you probably should just close, just shut it down. And they would say, shut it down. How can we do that? I can't just shut it down because this person needs this and this group needs this. And what about this family? And I said, okay, well, let's think about it. What are the absolute essential things that you absolutely must do? What are your essentials? Give me 3 essentials. When they were able to give me 3 essentials, I said, now the challenge that you should take on, and I don't mean challenge in a hard way, although it will be hard. I meant the thing that you get to do. The opportunity is that you will take those essentials and administer them in ways that you had not needed to before. And so all the things that we do in church are fantastic. Maybe they glorify God, but what we want to do is think about the most essential core of who we are as a congregation and figure out how we communicate it, how we deliver it, how will we minister it, and really focus on that. So one of the things I really need you to do is revisit your essentials. Take a moment, take a pause to actually just stop and say, what is essential about our ministry, and really spend some time there figuring that out. I have a couple of questions I want to run by you that you can kind of just like think that are very important questions as you consider all of these different things. You can jot them down as I go through here. So what is your church's mission? Can you fulfill it without a Sunday morning expression? What did we want to take into the future from this present crisis? How should this shared moment prepare us to become Jesus' church for the present future? We are semi-comfortable with our technology. So now what? What day in history has had more ears tuned into the gospel message this than it has been during the live streaming of Easter Sunday services into living rooms, almost as though Easter became the Super Bowl? You know, so it is both the spiritual curiosity and the devout alike that are right there trying to figure things out and experience Easter. Take advantage of that opportunity. When have neighborhoods had more Christ-like Christ followers from various tribes joining forces in prayer walks, needs meetings, gospel sowing than these past few years in this pandemic? How can we stop that? We cannot. We need to continue to take that forward. When have more disciples been driven to their knees on behalf of the spiritual and physical conditions of others? We are praying and praying and praying and praying, and there are those who are praying that there be a cure for coronavirus or Corona-19. And so we have been driven to our knees and driven to a place of collective humbleness. And so we don't want to get up from that. We want to stay humble, stay in this place where we are praying for each other, caring about each other, checking each other, not allowing for isolation to be the devil, the destroyer. Next question is, when face-to-face gatherings prevail again, if that happens in the way that you once thought it did, will your people still see the need to keep this online presence alive? And I think that's a question that's been examined quite a bit already. And so I'm not encouraging that everyone has to do online worship. Is not really for every church, but you do want to think about that. So will they invest in the technology upgrade that they need to in order to have that online presence? And I'm not saying you need to go out and spend on the best and things like that. But there are varying ways to inexpensively do this very thing. So really have those conversations and talk to people who seem to be doing it very well. Get online and see other churches in your city, your neighborhood, and then ask them, how are you doing this? Teach us how to do this. What is a way that we can do this on our budget's level? And one more question. A time like this makes one become a little more introspective by nature and ask, what's the meaning of all this? How do I make sense of all this? Why is there so much suffering? And so when we ask ourselves these questions, we turn those into prayers and we begin to petition God and really seek God's face to understand those things. And then as those realities, as that happens, those realities turn into revelations. The pandemic has managed to kill off some mindsets that no longer serve the church. So what revelations have come into play that weren't there before? Many of these shifts, decades in the making, happened overnight. Things that you were able to do that you probably thought you would never be able to do has now come into play. So I hope that you feel encouraged and equipped to be able to do some things that once you said was impossible. And we know we serve a God that specializes in the impossible. Another reality into Revelation is why fear death of the church, per se, of the capital C church. What's wrong with what's the worst thing that could happen to the church? I die and I receive a reward that I've been looking for my whole life. How is that fearful? So when we do these things as a church and there is a death, we understand death a little differently than others. We know that death is the precursor to resurrection. So if your church has to do a death, if your church has to die, it does not have to stay that way, because we understand the resurrecting power of the Spirit, and we can follow Jesus' footsteps and resurrect our ministry in different manifestations than before. COVID-19 gives Christians an opportunity to live out God's vision for an unified church. And we want that. We want us to figure out ways in which we can come together, just like we have from all over the state here today. So God knew that this day would come, and here it is. We need to move forward, and we need to trust the change. We need to trust the change, because this is exactly what God would have for us to do, not bow down and cower to what is taking place, but to really try to put this into perspective. And we do that by taking some quick shifts and turning them into actual cultural shifts. So the purpose is to become a sustainable shift in culture. So we must name and acknowledge the quick mindset shifts that have taken place, and then ground these shifts in biblical stories and biblical principles, and figure out how we do things in a sustainable way. And we could sacralize many of these shifts as well. So we think ahead about major moments like graduations and like Pentecost. And the pandemic brought out both a creative urge to stay connected and fun ways to accomplish this. So while commemorating a sacred occasion is really important, we do have to think about innovation and how to be new. And it also boosts your own immunity to burnout, fatigue, and isolation if you are able to lean into that. So I've said a lot here today. I really appreciate your time. Listen, us at New Church Ministry want to partner with you in this. If there's ways in which we can help you be more innovative, we have a intensive that we host every fall called Leadership Academy, where we talk about ministry innovation, we talk about sustainability in ministry, and come up with all new ways to be who God would have for us to be. We invite you to go to newchurchministry.org to learn more about what we do and how we can serve you and how we continue to serve the church. We encourage you to consider us as you are thinking about new pioneers in your congregation, or ways in which you are able to give for the legacy and the continuation of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. It has been my pleasure to serve you within this period of time, and to serve you over the past few years as your minister of New Church Strategies. God bless you, beloved.